the way you are responding to all sorts of situations might not be you. It may well be your nervous system. And if it's dysregulated, then there's a lot you can do. That is today's show. Hey, Jess, how are you?
Hello, Alex. I'm going great.
I am thrilled to have you as a repeat guest on the show. And we've done that beautiful masterclass that we did for the members to kick off, I think it was 2023 last year, together. So it's always just such a pleasure to chat. And of course, we're fellow TEDxers at the same event. That's how we met.
We are. Wasn't that a good time?
It was beautiful. You have wow, you have a life experience that almost catapulted you into nervous system work. And I wondered if you might share some of that with us to start.
Sure. I'd love to. So I was, as you said, working as a physio for about a decade, and I had my own clinic. And, a lot of the people that I was seeing that came in were dealing with chronic symptoms. And I'm sure, your audience can relate to this. I know that it's a similar crossover, but a lot of people were presenting with things like chronic pain, anxiety, gut issues. And I really felt that I was only seeing what was above the surface of the water. And I'd learned a lot of interesting research around the brain-body connection, but it was often a challenge to explain this to people. Sometimes it felt like you were telling them their pain was all in their head, and it was hard to put this really complex science into ways that people could understand it and also feel empowered to do something with it. So I had made a choice to close my clinic and actually take a bit of a sabbatical. And so I was going to study the mindfulness meditation teacher training program. It was a certification with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach in the US. And that was more to look at the communication between the brain and body. It was really aimed at people who were coaches or health professionals as well. So I was due to go close my clinic, and then it was actually 3 weeks before I was due to fly. My brother Sam died by suicide.
Yeah.
And so, as you can imagine, it was a real shock to my system. The only way I can sort of explain what it was like was that it felt like the ground was just falling out from underneath me. And, it was an extremely difficult period for my parents too. And what made it even worse was that my younger brother, Luke, had died when I was 4. So it was the second sibling I was coming to terms with losing, but the concern that I felt for my parents was profound as well. With their encouragement, I still went to the US to study. It was very much inspired by Sam and the challenges that he'd faced, but also my parents were really aware of the area that I wanted to go, the work I wanted to do, and certainly said, no, go, we'll be fine. You need to do this. And it was really interesting, because I learned so much on many different levels, but I think from, grief has been described as soul work, because there comes this real surrendering over and over again. Like there's, it floors you. But one thing that I think I really learnt about was the power of community and co-regulation, because I arrived in the US and went into this training with 300 other people who were strangers, but just being in the room with my teachers and the other students, I just felt really held. And, they talk about it in Buddhist psychology as the power of the Sangha, or community. It's a true refuge. And I think that that's something that we don't have enough of.
Could not agree more.
So
people, a sense of, like I actually even just had this mini feeling of it last night when I lent into hubby and we were just watching a movie together. I just thought, God, that just feels so safe and grounding, just like that. And isn't that beautiful? And like tuning into that, I don't know that my nervous system of 5 years ago would have even been able to recognize what true safety felt like.
Exactly. And it is, and it's such a fast process that
Mm,
bypasses our thinking brain and moves us into regulation so fast. But even when we look at this as supporting members of our community, you know, how we build that feeling of belonging to something. And that was such a beautiful place to land. And I had I really got to know nervous system dysregulation well. Like I
mm.
say, this is where it was about learning to walk the talk. And I don't think I would be able to teach the way I do now if I didn't really know what it felt like to
Mm.
experience those, you know, complete periods of shutdown where you literally can't get up off the couch.
I often wonder if it's part of the human experience, Jess, like making our mess our message. As you know, I have held many, like probably over 500 hours of interviews in my time so far. And I cannot tell you the amount of people who I would consider to be the brightest minds, best scientists, best doctors, best health professionals have these stories of pain and introspection that become that, we make the mess our message. And because you come from that unique place of, I tried everything, nothing worked, and then found this work to truly help myself and others. There's something just so powerful and attractive to other humans about that as well, I think.
I totally agree, Alex. And the commitment that you can see
Mm,
from people to that work, the authenticity, you know, it's not about um, what front can I put on. It's really like, this is
yeah.
my story. This is who I am. So I feel really fortunate to be able to do this work, but it did take the painful lessons of, you know, trying the talk therapy and each time talking about Sam's death or even Luke's death. It was just this activating process where I would walk out feeling like I feel worse, like I feel
Mm,
more mobilized through my body, and I've got no resources of what to do with this. And so I knew that it was going to take a deep dive into understanding more so how to work with what was coming up in the body. And I knew from I cognitively knew that this was how to work with profound stress, shock, trauma, and loss. But it was through that I was like, right, this will be my practice. And sometimes I worked with other health professionals with body-based therapies, but most of it I did by myself, but still leaned into the power of co-regulation and support and community. And so I came back to Australia after quite some time away, and the patients that I were working with, you know, they'd all gone through something similar, but you know, I was at a stage then when I'd moved through most of that dysregulation and was really ready to support others. And this is the beauty of when you go through an experience like this, because you learn again and again how to be with this wider range of experience, then you're ready to support others in a bigger way. And so,
mhm.
you know, I was really looking at, okay, well, how can I get the feeling of co-regulation for my clients? Like, I knew that it was important to listen and attune and all of those things, but I made that as like part of the treatment, you know? So
Yeah.
it was like, how can I really hear them? How can I have them feeling like I'm working alongside of them, helping them find their own answers within? How can I support their nervous system? And then being aware that if I was moving out of this window of regulation, I could no longer regulate them. So
Mm.
that meant changes in the day, you know, like creating those windows of time between patients, not seeing 18 patients a day.
Gee, you think that made a difference? Let's see.
I'm
Yeah.
a slow learner before. I'd say my physio clinic was like the place where I made every mistake, but it was a really good apprenticeship, the first one, and then I
Mm,
learned some big lessons. But um, it was from that process that, and so many of my patients wanted to hear about the nervous system, and
mm,
I was like, they can do this on their own. This is what I did. So we started with live workshops, which sold out around Australia. It was amazing. And then my husband just kept saying, you need to take this online. And I, of course, was going, it won't work online. Don't
I've got to be with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know how husbands do that annoying thing and then they're right.
They just cut through it all and just say one top line sentence, like the male brain is so good at doing. And I mean, I know we can generalize and then that can be unhelpful as well, but I genuinely do admire that about male brain tendencies compared to, but what if, and like we're like in all the different what ifs and possibilities, but that's our job as well. And I think those biological differences actually complement each other.
Yes, 1,000%. We can give another perspective that they can't.
Exactly.
So he was right. And we did the masterclass first and then went to the program. And now we've just done our nervous system certification course, which we're teaching to other health professionals to really deliver nervous system informed care to their patients.
Oh, so much to unpack from what you've just shared. Okay. The first thing I want to unpack was when you came back and you started infusing the nervous system work with patients. And you said, as you started to talk about it, you realized that your chronic pain patients seemed to all have similar stories to you in one way or another.
Yeah.
So was that really your first, like, oh my gosh, here is the link? And then I want to ask from that, how did you then start explaining the pain nervous system relationship differently so people didn't think, oh, you're just trying to tell me it's all in my head?
They're really good questions. I think I realized more when I was overseas that I started to think about the patients and was like, oh, that's what that was. It's as I
Ah.
was learning, people were coming to mind and I was seeing things in a new lens, if you like a new paradigm. And that was really powerful because there was parts of it where I was like, they actually needed more of XYZ. They needed, but I think the part about the nervous system that's amazing is people see it or they can embody that. They get that feeling of like, oh, that's so this mobilization, this rushing, this urgency, this feeling like the other shoe's going to drop, the story like, something really bad's going to happen, my insomnia, the way that I'm being really reactive in relationships, that is all in one particular part of my nervous system. And it's once you explain it and then somebody recognizes it a few days later, it's like a light bulb, and they start to go, this isn't me, it's my nervous system responding. So you sort of give them that sense of freedom from being caught in that. There's a
And
change in self, if you like.
yes, so can I ask you then, because this is often men from just talking to that many girlfriends over the years, this is just who I am, is often something men say. And I often wonder whether that is because we haven't allowed men to explore their complexities and responses and nervous system in the way women and girls and I would say LGBT would feel called and compelled to explore the nuances of who we are, how we are, and how we react. I feel like men just had to be strong, get on with it, and like a lot of guys who are now adult men now really did grow up in those realities. And so, how does one go on a personal journey to feel even safe to explore? It's not me, it's my responses, man or woman for that matter, because of course that could be both.
Oh, that's a good question.
Sorry, I'm
No,
just
I
like,
love this.
this is so
It
interesting.
is, it is. I think the way people typically come to nervous system work is they're really suffering, hey. There's like either physical pain or emotional pain, and it's likely being caused by traumatic stress. and we think of trauma as, the car accident, the abuse, some kind of war or tsunami, and not to in any way minimize the pain that people have around that. But what we've got to understand is that the same response through the brain and body happen if we lose control, agency, we feel powerless. So that could be anything, that could be a business failing, that could be at the end of a relationship or a divorce. And when people feel stuck for so long, I think there's a real openness to exploring different things. What's really interesting is, like, there's no fixed sense of self. It's this dynamic construct from what's going on in the body and the way that the networks are created in the brain. And so if we look at this from the different states of the nervous system, sometimes we might be more of a protector, like to get it done, I'm gonna, and we feel that drive, we feel that sometimes externalizing our behavior. So maybe when there's been a behavior like anger or yelling or, the ongoing fighting in a relationship where we're like, this needs to change, or my relationship is going to be very unhealthy, that can be the start of learning something new. But there's also the place inside of us that can feel really disowned, or, the one that needs to be protected. And that can be a part where we feel so lost and hopeless, disconnected, and really vulnerable. And for a lot of people, like, who feel the shame, anyone whose business is having a hard time is likely going to feel intense fear and shame. That in itself can be the place where the work begins. So when we open up a community for a program, the stories that come through, just every time I will be feeling teary, because you really hear the times that people have been through, like what you were saying, it was me seeing other people's stories, like people who've lost children, people who've lost family. And so there is a realization that the old self can't keep going that way. It's more and more painful. So I think that's why this work is so highly transformative. And, post-traumatic growth is a real thing.
Yeah, it really is.
People can have this expansion emotionally, spiritually, and it's really meeting a new sense of self, which brings a lot more freedom. And I think that's, to me, what regulation is. So as we widen that ability, or that zone of our regulation, it's not just to have a regulated nervous system. It means that we can love more fully, because we can actually be present with the other person. We can't be intimate with others if we can't be intimate with our own inner world and what's going on. We have this freedom that comes when we're not living in a survival state. So I would say people are often drawn to it from a traumatic stress, but it can be chronic too, but often traumatic stress.
100%. And I always think, like, back to a massive breakup I had in my mid-20s, one of those quarter life crisis explosions where you leave the job and the relationship breaks down and it just all blows up. And it was one of my lowest moments in my life at that point. And my bestie at the time gave me Khalil Gibran's book, like, so 20-something, like, spiritual awakening stuff. But I remember reading the quote from the sorrow chapter: the deeper the sorrow carved, the greater the joy could fill. Wow. And that has stayed with me for decades, because of, like, you never feel the power of sorrow when you're in the depths of it, but when you're in the expansive rebirthing part, things open up that you could never have imagined experiencing. And I often think of nervous system work in the same way.
Yes, 1,000%. And there is that part of surrendering to something. And there is often a stage of, like, I have to let go of the old, like, it's not going to serve me anymore. But I believe that it is extremely transformative for people. And it's so hard when you've gone through something traumatic to have that hope, because the nervous system is putting you into a sense that of
There
hopelessness.
is none. Yeah. And you are
Exactly.
not safe.
Yes. And this
Yeah.
will never end is the other thing.
Mm.
But from what we learn, I think it's the purpose that it brings. So for a lot of the people that I get to teach, their pain becomes the purpose, like what you said with the people you've interviewed. There's like, I want to live with more meaning. I want to do the work that is going to support others. I think that's such a beautiful thing. Like the stories that people can share can, it was hearing other people's stories that helped me through those hard times.
Mm.
When I lost Sam, it was probably 3 months after his death. I was in France. I'd gone from the US to Europe, and France, I really spiraled because not many people were speaking English. So I was like feeling isolated on top of the grief. And so I Googled grief retreat in a moment of desperation and ended up seeing that in Colorado there was a silent retreat. And it was all based on grief. Now, that probably sounds awful to so many people. Like it
Yeah,
sounds
I
so
know what we need
morbid.
to do. Just not talk at all. No touching, no hugging, no talking.
And
Yeah.
just not being in grief. But ironically, it worked out with when I was going back to the US for more study. So I went, and it was so beautiful to be amongst this community of people who understood my experience, even as we sat
Mm.
in silence. And it turned out the woman that I shared the room with, even though we didn't speak, she'd also lost her brother by suicide,
Oh.
which I found out at the end, and invited me back to her family afterwards to meet her family. I met her children. It was just such a beautiful moment of connection that would never have happened. And I think those are the moments, like we as a society don't support people who are grieving so well,
Mm.
such a primal, messy thing. And I think and it's a response of our nervous system, right? It's a processing and a metabolizing that I think as a community we could do more. I mean, we pathologize it if it's longer than 12 months. I mean, anyone who's lost a child, how can you say, okay, I'm done at 12 months? I find that so bizarre.
Well,
So
especially when our culture, a lot of our cultures in modern times don't have frameworks for stepping through grief. I remember interviewing Amanda Gordon, who comes from the Jewish faith, and she was stepping through all the different protocols of I think it's the first 40 days or something. And I was like, wow, people are so held. I've never experienced anything like that. Losing grandma, auntie, first cousin to suicide. And I think, wow, we really aren't set up to move through grief in a way that feels supportive and safe to grieve.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Alex. I think it's something culturally that you do see other cultures do it really well. But here it's almost like the funeral's over. Okay, we're done now.
Mm.
And
Imagine that.
yeah.
It's absolutely ludicrous. Absolutely
I know.
ludicrous.
I know. And then the avoidance, around, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And it's like, do you want to hear how I really am?
Mm.
But I was lucky that I had really good friends that could sit in that space of the
Yeah.
messiness and that community that I told you about, where it was the initial training I ended up going back to again, and it was just I felt so supported and held. But this is why I think the beauty of us having our own nervous system that's regulated, we can give that to other people when it's not
Mm.
about finding the right words. A lot of the time it's just sitting there with someone.
Yeah.
It's not about what you say, it's your presence, your energy, your ability to attune to them as they show all of their hurt and mess with that grieving process.
I often think that maybe it's a reckoning for someone to realize they can't actually sit with hurt.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Because
we have a really positive.
yeah, positive toxicity culture, right? I was actually so shocked when, and I'm certainly not comparing my experience with mold to losing a sibling to suicide. I'm not. So I want to
Mhm.
make that super clear. Just sharing my own trauma, that's all.
Mhm.
And I was actually so shocked that I could be so sick and have moved house 7 times in 2 years and have friends not know how to just check in. I actually became too complicated for a lot of people in my close circles. And I'm like, wow, what a way to just pile on an already dysregulated nervous system. Let's just leave them alone now and see how that works out for them. And that's not their fault. I'm coming back to my first statement. I think one of the best things we can do to tune in to ourselves to create more regulated and co-regulated dynamics is to go, can I sit with a friend in need when I can't do a thing and I might not even understand it, but I can just let them be in pain next to me and that's okay.
Exactly. I 100% agree with you. And it's interesting. I was just reading some really interesting research on what we would say, we used to call it compassion fatigue, but there's really no such thing as compassion fatigue. It's actually empathy fatigue, and our ability to be able to recognize what belongs to us and what belongs to somebody else, and then fully support them means that we need to have this awareness of our own nervous system. So the example they used in this study was around a vet who their job was to euthanize animals, so their families would come in, and because that she'd euthanized her own animals, it was like being able to compassionately recognize that this was that family's grief, this was that family's sadness. It didn't belong to her. But if she had trained herself to be compassionate, it actually connected to networks in the body and brain to do with the vagus nerve, but also areas in the brain it was neurologically supportive. It was enriching, as opposed to empathy, where we say it's almost like projecting our own sadness, our own feelings, like, oh, I could never cope with what they're going through, rather than just being able to say, yes, I feel for this person and recognize that inside of ourselves. But that's their grief, that's their hurt, and I care for them and I'm supporting for them. But I think there's a few things we either avoid altogether because we think we're not going to be able to cope, or there is that lack of myself anew, like empaths, what we would see there as well. So it's interesting, this knowing our nervous system. And I know we spoke about this last time about interoception. That's the ability to tune into what's happening in our own body at the time. And it might be that we can only be present with somebody for an hour, but that's okay. That's enough, just to sit there with them, hold them, support them. And then if we start to recognize, okay, this is a lot, I'm going to take care of myself now, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's that awareness, isn't it? It's always going to start with
Yes.
the awareness.
Yeah, we do. And I think to also recognize that if we can't even be with someone who's suffering for a little bit, then there's actually nervous system work to do on ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're scared of, oh, I won't know what to say, or I don't know how to
Mm,
show up. Yeah, absolutely.
mm,
Definitely. And that's a bigger picture, that's like, what role do I want to play in my community? It's not,
yeah,
it's beyond just us for
it
sure.
is. It
Mm.
absolutely is. And I feel like even though we've moved on from you sharing that you also lost your other brother at 4, I do want to come back to it because so often we can think we've moved on from certain things or through certain things enough to thrive and live our lives. And then
Mm.
something else happens and there's actually cause for revisit. Now, you were 4
Mm.
when your other brother, I don't know his name,
His
sorry,
name was Luke.
Luke,
Mhm.
died.
Mhm.
And so I'd imagine like you would have almost even not been able to connect to the events and feelings that you might have had as a little girl when he passed away. How did that show up for you as you grieved Sam?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Alex. It was something that I'd had vague, what we call explicit memories. I could see the time when he died as a memory, but then also if you look at research on memory, even that's not so. It could have just been the story that I heard and thought that that was the
Or
story.
the
Like
photos in the albums of the time, I often think I confuse with. Yeah.
exactly, and that's been shown like that we do
Mm,
that. But I was actually working through the hurt of what was coming up in my body, and I was it was in a partnered exercise, and I had this feeling of like it was the loss of Sam, but there was something else there. And it was almost like a feeling of a boulder, like a huge boulder sitting on my upper back. And it kind of wanted to floor me, which is very much dropping down into that nervous system state of the dorsal vagal collapse. So I could really feel that. And as I sat with it, I had a visual that came up, and it was opening up to the loss of my other brother as well. So what was so profound was that both came, like there was Sam's death, but that came to the surface to be processed. And it absolutely can, because we have implicit memories. And
mm,
so when something feels the same, it will activate the old situation. So essentially, people getting triggered by a trauma will be, that is an implicit memory. So that can
mm,
show up in bodily sensations, it can show up in our heart rate, our belly. For me, I was seeing the visual clearly, which can happen as well as we enter into a state of dysregulation. So a lot of that I needed to process as the 4-year-old self, and
mm,
also like the grief or the sadness around that my poor parents, who I would felt them be different because they were grieving. But as a 4-year-old, you don't get an understanding of parents being sad, and that's that. You internalize that as, I've done something wrong.
mm,
So there was a lot of that shame to work through as well, because we almost immediately do that. I mean, even as adults, and I love the analogy of the second arrow in Buddhist psychology, which is, we have the initial pain, which is the arrow, and then we shoot ourselves again for having the pain, but with
mm,
shame around it. And it happens so quick. So for me, a lot of that was pulling out the second arrow, coming to where the wound was, and sitting with the first arrow. It was very difficult. I am not going to lie that some days that amount of grieving that's all I could do.
mm,
It's a very, very challenging time. However, it does show that we have this capacity to change, and really from processing those situations, I changed how I was, I'm going to say, I changed relationally, that I wouldn't immediately internalize things as my fault. And that made a big
mm.
difference in relationships then. Because when we do that, and it's so much of this happens below the,
Conscious thought.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but we get the same patterns showing up in relationships. So
Mm,
I met my now husband a year after Sam died, and
mhm,
um, maybe a little bit longer. But that was a corrective experience, learning to form a relationship with these new insights that I'd gained. And he is to me what you explained with your husband, where you feel that deep sense of safety and trust. And, we hear a lot around being ready for relationships and
mm,
having to be regulated. it's so not true. You know, we are never perfectly ready for a relationship. I think it's we're all going to have stuff that we bring with us to that. So yeah, it was I'm not going to lie, it was very painful, but also I would say it was highly transformative as well. You know, both
Mm,
through we can have the pain, but then often it is what creates that transformation to a new sense of self and new and the networks to do with regulation and
yeah,
attachment, they're shared, they're the same. So when we regulate more, we're always going to have healthier attachment.
love where this is going, Jess. Because I wanted to ask you sort of for some let's paint pictures, you know, in
Mm,
parent dynamics, in work dynamics, in relationship dynamics. And you know, I encourage everybody to listen to the first show we did, which was a very practical nuts and bolts nervous system show, definitions. Obviously, your book really unpacks that, certainly in the first half as well.
mhm,
So I want to use this special time to really illustrate things and
mm.
make people think, oh, yeah, that shows up for me with that particular friend or in that relationship or this one, you know.
Yes,
Or maybe parents stressing out that they're not creating healthy attachment with their kids and
yes,
responding to stuff ups that of course kids are doing because they're in like full practice mode on their journey to becoming adults.
yes.
And we certainly don't become experts the day we turn 18, right? So, can we start with parent child dynamics? I know you have a bub,
Yes.
and maybe talking about what we now know to be especially helpful
Mm.
in co-regulation and attachment, and how we could maybe recognize that perhaps there might be some work based on what was missing or unhelpful in our own childhoods.
Mm.
I mean, that's the 3 hour seminar in itself. I get that. But even just a couple of examples.
Yeah, sure. I love it because the nothing shows you your own nervous system more than your children. You know,
Mm,
they're this instant mirror of like, Mom.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think to know that the nervous system, it's so relational and we often think, well, this is inside my body or it's connecting my body and brain, but it's inside me. However, that is profoundly impacting other people. Like it's through our voice, it's through the expression in our eyes, it's through our gestures,
Mm,
and it's also through how we listen. And that's the social engagement system and the vagus nerve connecting from the heart up to the face. So, we'll immediately see mums, and I do this all the time with babies, talking in a sing-songy voice, bring that co-regulation, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's almost an instinctive thing. Um, I think what we're seeing is that big shift towards prioritizing connection over looking at behaviors. If I see when my daughter is really yelling out, I mean, I work and she's with her dad a lot of the time, and when I get home, she is just mama, and it's that
Mm,
she needs that attachment, and she won't settle till I've stopped and given her that full presence, spent that time with her, let her have as much as she wants, and then she's happy. It's like I got that connection with you. And we were talking about this before the call around sleep, and
mm,
she still sleeps next to us, and I had this judgment of, oh, I probably should have her in her own bed, but she sleeps well, my husband sleeps well, I sleep well, but there's that part where before the day starts, she's filled up. She's already coming in with a full tank because she's had that contact, the touch, the nurturing. Her love language is definitely touch, which I think we've got to look at this as that's our first sense of communication to develop is touch.
mm,
We all need lots of it. So that's the biggest part, I think, with kids. And then, people often assume that kids have a greater capacity for self-regulation than what they do. I think it's exactly what you said. Like, they need what we do is we put our mind in their mind. So as a child is focusing on something and we come in with them and we bring that attention and narrate what's happening, or we focus with them, you are literally creating those networks in the brain and body to do with self-regulation, to do with learning, like neuroplasticity takes place. And if you look with kids, there is this serve and return that builds regulation. Now, we can't attune to one child all the time. And that's the beauty of, this good enough parenting coming through. You don't need to beat yourself up if it's not perfect all the time. And I'm putting my hand up here and saying, this is, I'm really learning this at the moment, because there's, I've got students that I want to help. There's things to do at work, but I know that my daughter is well supported with her father, and she doesn't need my guilt coming in to change my own nervous system. She needs a present mama, which is about then, letting yourself off the hook a bit as well with that. But to know that the attunement, so that is tuning into the mirroring that we do, the serve and return, the back and forth, is literally what coats the vagus nerve, the part to do with regulation. Because for kids, it's up until adolescence before their part of their vagus nerve to do with emotional regulation is fully formed.
Yeah, and I think that can also be a really comforting thing to understand, that if our preteens, tweens still, and even early teens are still flying off the handle, and you start thinking, God, shouldn't they be able to regulate that by now? Or, they've played that many sports matches or run that many races. Why are they still melting down at the end of it? To really recognize that there are a lot of parts of their brain still forming, and to just be with them in their pain.
Exactly. I think a lot of what we expect isn't developmentally appropriate, like across the board. And like, you're going to stop and go, especially like I see Ivy do things and I'm like, wow, she can do that. Like this morning she was breaking eggs into the bowl for me to make an omelette. Like she was,
oh my God, how
I was
cute.
cracking. She was,
I remember those days. They're the
oh,
best.
but you've
So
got to let them
sweet.
help, don't you? Like otherwise it is just this power struggle. But then to realize, like, yeah, and she might have been able to do it on one day, but the next day, it's this up and down.
Yes.
And not trying to figure it all out. Like, I think for me, I love the nervous system as a lens for behavior. Like it's like, oh wow, she's really wound up. She needs this. I need to bring her down. Or she's really down. I need to bring her up to bring back into that zone. And I think that's like all relationships, if we see our partner, and it's not to try and cover over their experience.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I know what you're saying is not that you're trying to deny where people are at, but it's more about like recognizing the balance of like a motorcycle turning, right? And you can then complement in co-regulation.
Exactly. And prioritizing that, like I said, with patience, if the people around us are melting down, we don't want to jump in there with them. It's
hey.
I mean, I think Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about this so beautifully, where he says when they were on the refugee boats and there were pirates and it was so scary, coming to America, if one person stayed calm on the whole boat, then everyone was okay. If there's just one person. So I think it's really our ability when people around us are having a difficult time. I think there's a theme here, Alex. Able to stay grounded and regulated.
Oh, wow. It's something I've been thinking about so much as someone who has been in the health conversation for 15 years now online. And I see really intense favoritism for very black and white, very fear-based language rising to the top because of our negative biases and because it's more profitable essentially for big tech. And I often feel like I have this duty to find the moderate guest, the nuanced people who can unpack things rather than just slapping on another layer of terrifying people that they're doing the wrong thing, eating rice sometimes, or, like I think you could scare people about anything these days. And it seems to work better than saying, hey, this might work for you, but it might not. Let's figure out what the options are. That's not profitable.
No.
And it breaks my heart because it then sort of shows us that the world we're currently in is almost geared against us being regulated and feeling a sense of calm, flexible agency.
I totally agree, Alex. I mean, the online space is so interesting when you look at the fear-based language that's used. And, as a health professional, it's something I was so aware of because it showed, the link to pain, the language
Yeah.
that was used. So we can look at that as top-down influences on our nervous system. And complexities don't sell.
I know.
But this is like what like I love the complexities because it's really about exactly what you said, but we need to go bigger. Like if it's instead of looking at just biological, we look at biopsychosocial, like all the things, instead of looking at and I see it now even with the vagus nerve where it's like, well, how can I hack it? And it's like, well, it's not really one nerve that you can just hack. It's like it's an ecosystem, but its job is to relay messages, and then it's about how the whole flow of energy happens through your brain body system, which again, there isn't like a little hack for your nervous system. And if we look at the practice of neuroplasticity, that's repetition over time, things we do again and again. Like we said with grief, you don't just have one process or one moment where you're done. It's daily, surrendering again and again to a new reality. So yeah, I think it's about being really aware of how social media or online time is used in health because yeah, there's some really interesting things now. And I agree, you could scare somebody about anything.
Including doing nervous system work.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we talked a little bit there about just starting to bring your awareness to your child and a recognition that they're forming and they literally just need you there and to prioritize connection. With relationships, we're obviously unpacking an entire lifetime's worth of potential dysregulation and traumatic moments that we've experienced separately, and then we come together and join.
Yes.
And we're surprised that that doesn't always work out. How can we find, like, I often feel like the challenge with relationships, marriage, if you decide on that as well, is to almost work to find the journey closer together. Because I don't believe that's necessarily where we even start. We start quite much with a societal checklist. Yeah, there's chemistry and there's all the things that get us there in the first place to saying the yes and having the ceremonies and all that jazz. But I genuinely feel like that's where it begins, not where things sort of wrap up on the intimacy front.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we come to relationships with these expectations of, what another person's going to bring to us. But what I would say from an attachment perspective and also a nervous system perspective is there's this beautiful overlay of the two. And so if we're more anxious or mobilized or hyper aroused, we might find that when we are facing challenges or when we feel, say it's early on in the piece and we're dating and we might be finding ourselves anxious because somebody hasn't texted us back.
Yeah.
There can be more reactivity, more blame, more criticism. We externalize this behavior at someone. And I would say this isn't just romantic relationships. Like I've seen this
Mm.
in workplaces. The more anxious somebody is, the more blame there is at everybody else. And this is really somebody that would benefit from learning to resource themselves, independently first. So more
Mm.
self-regulation. And that's hard, if
Yeah.
someone hasn't texted back, if there's this feeling of abandonment. And a lot of that is coming from I'll be left, I'm alone. And until we tune into ourselves in a really deeply embodied way, we can't see the pattern in our nervous system happening.
Right. So I'll be left, I'll be alone. That's interesting because I'm then thinking of that in the work context. And it's like, I'll be left out, I'll be fired, I'll be without a job, and that will mean this. And like, so
Yes,
is
the
action,
hypervigilance that comes.
yes. So is hypervigilance one of our first clues, whether it's about the text message or the meeting minutes you didn't get the CC on that you thought you should be across?
Yes.
Um, is it about noticing that perhaps our response isn't productive to either the situation or to our own health? Or isn't even like, how do we even know? Okay, here's the question.
How do we
I'm
know
like, I'm
that?
trying to unpack it. How do we
Yeah.
even know that the response we're having is perhaps not appropriate to the
Mm,
situation at hand and almost counterproductive to what we want the outcomes ultimately to be?
mm. One of my teachers spoke about this as the sacred pause. And the sacred pause is very important for not doing damage to relationships and your possibly place at work. But I think for a lot of the time, we see this reactivity and we go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that or done that. And the reactivity, anger is another one that maps here, but we'll see the behavior first, and that's
Mm,
in a portal. Also, if we're really triggered, it's going to feel overwhelming. It's going to be strong. It's not the same as like an anger where we're like, that pissed me off and I'm going to take care of that. That's a different side of
So there's the linger and the it's staying with you, and then you're having dinner with your family that night, and the feeling about the 3 p.m. meeting's still there. And so that is what
that.
we can
And
start to look for.
probably like being so worked up that you can't even connect with your family. You can't even,
Okay.
you feel the heart pounding, and it's like, so for some people it'd be like, I feel like I'm climbing the walls, like that really wound up feeling. And I think to recognize that the internal experience doesn't match what's
Mm.
happening externally. But often when we get pulled into an old trigger, we can't we don't see the big picture anymore. We're just in this small tunnel vision. But if we repeatedly have this hypervigilance, they're against me, they're trying to keep me out of something, or they're not texting me back. It's dating, it's relationships, it's I'm helping health professionals see their
Mm.
strategies for trying to find relational safety with their patients and their true
Mm.
nice. We see it everywhere that we have a connection. So the other way it can go for the people who are more avoidant and they withdraw, isolate, they, don't want to go and see the friend, is to step into the connection, is to reach out, is to learn to find regulation with other people. Because,
Mm.
in childhood, it's likely they didn't have that experience of an adult who could put their mind in their mind, who could sit with them through all their mess and tantrums and meltdowns and big emotions. And that's by finding somebody they can do that with, that's a corrective experience as well. And we can see
Mm.
so both of them will come in the moments that are really difficult and we'll see the patterns. But again, as you said, it's awareness to see that ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. So much to unpack. I could talk to you for another hour, I swear, Jess. I really could.
Me too,
Um, but I will point our wonderful listeners to your gorgeous new book, The Nervous System Reset, which I really just want to flag here. I know publishers choose titles, and they want like it to sound like it's going to be this neatly packaged little book of success. But I also want to offer that it is the type of book that really very much for me feels like the start of unpacking the things we want to actually feel more regulated responses to in our own lives. That's what really came out for me. Yes, we learn the nuts and bolts and the body chemistry and how it all links, but at the same time, there's work to do for many of us, whether we know it yet or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. Once you see and you have the awareness, then it's realizing that the transformation actually happens in the doing. It's like we can't learn the piano by reading about it. We have to roll up our sleeves and practice. And it's through our relationships, it's through our work, it's through life that we get to practice this. And there's no finish line. We learn new things, we have new situations. So yeah, fascinating stuff. But I think it's what so many of us need from modern life is this ability to have the awareness and then guide ourselves back to regulation.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Alex.
I hope you loved today's show as much as I loved bringing it to you. I want to remind you that if you are someone who craves a low tox community that is judgment-free, full of empowerment, has health professionals and building health professionals that can support you, as well as me in there answering questions multiple times a week, I want to invite you to join the Low Tox Club. For the price of less than a cup of coffee a month, you have an annual membership for $49 Australian, so it's about $30 US or euro, that allows you to have a member masterclass every single month with a health professional or global expert from the podcast, where we have them to ourselves for an hour to ask questions and deep dive further. You have the beautiful supportive chat group. You have Q&As with me answering questions. We read books and talk about them, and a whole bunch more. You can head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the explore tab, and join the club is the very first option on that list. Of course, we have over 10 evergreen courses that you can jump into anytime, whether it's navigating everyday low tox swaps with our Go Low Tox signature course, whether you have kids and you're wanting to know how to best support them with our Low Tox Kids course, whether you're planning a family and looking at a healthy low tox preconception journey, reducing inflammation, especially the chronic kind, with our Inflammation Ninja course, many other courses. You can again head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the courses tab, and you'll see all of the options, which includes a business course, my Low Tox Method program. A lot of people don't know, but I was doing a lot before starting Low Tox Life in 2009, and I was a business consultant across hospitality, health, retail, and cosmetics. I have been in business consulting for a very long time, so I absolutely adore helping people move into the low tox space or develop their low tox businesses. So that's a way I can support you. And then, of course, there's our wonderful social media communities at Low Tox Life on Instagram, and of course, the website with over 250 gluten-free recipes, blogs, downloadable PDFs to help you navigate wanting to get rid of synthetic fragrances in your school or office. I could go on. So head to lowtoxlife.com, see what takes your interest or fancy, and thank you so much for being a part of our podcast community. I love reading your reviews. I appreciate every follow and subscribe, and I want to just remind you to finish off that if there's anything you heard that you found interesting from a medical or scientific perspective, it is intended as education only. Please always chat to a health professional who knows you and your situation best. I'll see you next week. Bye.